we're talking about renunciation this week. And as I was thinking about this topic, what came to me was the story of Buddha and how Maara tried to interfere with his enlightenment. And I wondered, what did the Buddha renounce in this encounter with Maara? And Maara is often described as the Buddha's enemy, as the ruler of demons, is depicted as this fairly scary character. And generally, Maara is portrayed as seeking to disrupt or destroy the Buddha's attainment of enlightenment. And the teaching that I usually understood from the story was that the Buddha achieved enlightenment by doing battle with all the temptations that Maara threw at him, desire with his 3 beautiful daughters tempting the Buddha with lust and sensual pleasures, and throwing his army of demons at the Buddha to elicit fear and anger, and then questioning, what makes you think you deserve? Why are you worthwhile? And instilling doubt. And so the Buddha overcame those temptations, and that was the renunciation, saying no to sense pleasures and no to anger and hatred and no to self-doubt. But then I thought, if we take this a bit deeper, the Buddha didn't blame Maara for these temptations. He didn't renounce and push away Maara. He renounced reacting to these temptations. And by not reacting, he was able to, as Catherine pointed out earlier this week, create space for something more beneficial, for some deeper wisdom, for some peace and equanimity that goes along with enlightenment. By releasing ill will and not responding out of ill will and trying to fight and do battle, he was able to let go of fear and create a space of kindliness and compassion. And we can see this in the language of the story, where he's seen as transforming the spears and arrows of the demon horde into flowers. A process of transformation, not attack. The story of the Buddha and Maara, but doesn't end there with his enlightenment, but continues. Sometime after the Buddha attained enlightenment, he's meditating in his hut with his disciple Ananda, who is rather protective of the Buddha, watching out over the Buddha's meditation. And who should arrive but Maara? And Ananda sees Maara at the door and becomes very concerned and worried. He tries to get Maara to leave, saying, "How can you show up here? You tried to keep the Buddha from enlightenment. You are the Buddha's enemy." And as Thich Nhat Hanh tells the story, Maara starts laughing and says, "Are you saying that the Buddha has enemies?" And Ananda realizes that thinking the Buddha has enemy doesn't align with the Dharma, with the teachings. And he realizes that he has to go and tell the Buddha that Mara's come calling. Deep down, hoping that the Buddha says, well, just get rid of him, just send him away. But that's not what the Buddha says. The Buddha smiles beautifully and says, "Maara, how wonderful. Ask him to come in, make some tea, offer him some tea." And Ananda is astonished to watch Maara and the Buddha chatting like dear old friends. And as Thich Nhat Hanh describes it, the Buddha practices hugging meditation with Maara, welcoming into his hut. The Buddha hasn't renounced Maara. He's not experiencing aversion, anger, or hatred towards Maara. What the Buddha is renouncing is having an enemy. He saw into the interconnectedness of Maara and himself. There's no Buddha if there isn't a Maara. There's no enlightenment without Maara. Mara's been the Buddha's most dedicated teacher, giving him the most challenging lessons. And even though those lessons have been very difficult, we might view Maara as one of the Buddha's benefactors, creating the conditions for enlightenment. So I thought of who I usually see as benefactors in my life, the easy ones, those people who love me, who care about me, who I trust, wish me only well-being. And then I realized even with those people, I often get angry. We have arguments. I see them as an enemy, someone who disagrees with me, criticizes me, or hurts me. I see them as Maara, my enemy. But what if I see this from a more mindful perspective and view them as my teacher and renounce, let go of making them an enemy, and view them as Maara, my teacher, my skillful teacher, and my benefactor, not out to destroy me, but giving me chances to strengthen my practice, to cultivate what's helpful and beneficial, and to learn how to renounce my reactivity. And as I had this awareness, I thought of my partner and an argument we'd had and the anger I was still clinging to. I thought, there you are, my Maara. You're giving me another lesson in how not to cling to making my loved one an enemy, on how to release my favorite habitual stories of making someone else the wrong one. And I could feel, as I thought of my loved one as an enemy, that the tightening and hardening of my heart, the shutting down, the pushing away, all that painful, suffering energy. But as I could let go of this habitual enemy making, I could feel into a space of more ease, of softening, of more peace, and a deeper awareness also of all the ways I see others as an enemy, whether it's people or things, and how much suffering this creates, how much my heart has to be protected and guarded and shut off from the rest of the world, from other people, from things, from situations like having a cold that won't go away and making that cold my enemy, or having back spasms and making back spasms my enemy, or wanting to eat another piece of pie that I shouldn't eat and making pie my enemy. So many ways to create enemies in this world. And the suffering of seeing so much of the world as an enemy. And I could see how our human world is just filled with this Maara as an enemy. There are just so many ways that we do this. That's the way our brains work. Blaming other people, things, or situations for my suffering and the suffering in the world. And yet so many possibilities for deepening my practice, for learning the lesson of renouncing enemy making. Multiple opportunities every day. I don't know about you, but I have multiple opportunities to do this every day. I know, like Ananda, that making others the enemy isn't the answer. But it's still difficult to not react out of my own fear, greed, anger, or ignorance. I can notice when I'm making someone or something my enemy. You know, and putting it in those terms is new. I've not thought that I have enemies. Maybe adversaries, maybe challenging people, maybe difficult people, but all of those I recognize fit under this category of enemy. And is that the suffering I want to create? I can notice that. I can notice my suffering when I'm enemy making. I can create a kind space to honor my distress and my discomfort while also practicing the renunciation, the letting go of enemy making. This doesn't mean being passive in the face of violence, harm, injustice, inequity, but of facing these as courageously and beneficially as I can with compassion and interconnectedness. And I think of the inspiring story of two fathers, one Palestinian and one Israeli, who both lost children as a part of this ongoing conflict, and how they came together to create a group of parents who had lost children during this conflict. They were able to let go of seeing each other as the enemy and see their common suffering and create this space for healing, for compassion, for providing comfort, and seeing that common suffering. And that's not to diminish the horror of this awful conflict or to suggest tolerating it, nor is it about judging myself or others if we're not yet ready to let go. Rather, just acknowledging how these men might be benefactors to all of us in letting go of making anyone an enemy. Meeting myself where I am at with kindness and compassion, even if it's just beginning to become willing to let go of enemies in my life. If these men can do it, perhaps we can do it, just as the Buddha and Maara showed us it could be done. So thank you for your kind attention.